morning, everyone. Oh, an attentive crowd. So, Noel, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We are excited to learn more about you, and it looks like we have some prospective AARP members in the audience. No offense. Or congratulations to you. That's right. That's what we're supposed to. That's
That's a
the
better
vibe.
perspective, yes.
That's right. So I'm so excited to talk to you and to share your life journey with our audience this morning. I learned so much in the pre meetings. I almost wish those could be the live events, but let's see if I can remember what we talked about. So let's start at the beginning and tell us about your childhood growing up in India.
I had a very interesting childhood, and I grew up in a fairly large, fairly well-known Episcopalian family, and I need to mention that because a lot of my family members were bishops and Episcopalian reverends, and my maternal uncle also happened to be the moderator for the Church of South India, which is all of the Episcopalian Church in all of the South Asian countries, the head. So there were only 9 moderators in the world, and he was one of them. And so, a fairly well-known family, and so there were a lot of expectations of you, of how you behaved in public, at home, and all of that. But I had a fascinating childhood. A lot of creativity, a lot of encouragement, and a lot of support. I also, for those of you who might be familiar with India and some of the cultural aspects of India, particularly towards a male child, I was the first male grandchild after several granddaughters, so it was a big deal. I was born in April, and yet it was like Christmas, so they call me Noel. And yes, yeah. And so that should give you a little glimpse of what life was like.
Yeah. Wait, which day in April were you born?
Earth Day, April 22nd.
Oh, interesting. I'm the 12th.
Okay.
Yeah, so that explains a lot, right?
Yes.
So a lot of expectations. What were your career aspirations when you were a child? What did you think you were going to grow up to be? And I guess what did your family think you were going to grow up to be?
I think for a while, my family and I had a similar aspiration that I was going to be a doctor. Okay, and again, fairly stereotypical if you know about Indian families, and everybody wants their child to become an engineer or a doctor. That's changed a lot, fortunately, in the past couple of decades. But they wanted me to become a doctor, and I wanted to become a doctor as well. And did all that growing up until I got to a stage where I had to decide. And I think that's the first time my mom and I really kind of butted heads. And when I said, I don't think I want to do this, and she was like, how could you not do that? Yes. So,
and you got your undergraduate and graduate degree in India?
Correct, at Osmania University. So I did my undergraduate in life sciences, and then my master's I did in public personnel management.
And what was your first paying job?
My first paying job was when I was 18. I worked for a researcher that was researching automobile logos in India. So I knocked on doors, every 5th door in 16 different localities around where I lived. And I got a lot out of that experience.
So did you be like, which one do you like? Is that what you...
No, which one do you recognize?
Oh, I see.
It was really about, there was a new car company that was kind of coming up with they were trying to figure out what their logo should be like. And so they hired this research company to kind of do a market survey. And I was one of those people with a pad walking from home to home, and it was a fun experience. That was my first thing. I was so proud. It wasn't much money, but I was so proud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. So you've been to Maine twice, right, with, parts of your career. How did you get to Maine the first time?
So when I was still living in India, there was an Australian exchange student who came to India. Those of you who know the International Student Association, ISAC, if you don't know, look them up. It's an international student that association that run by students around the world that brings students around economics and commerce. And so Megan, my friend, came to India to do an internship at India's leading financial accounting firm. And we became really good friends. And very soon she went back to travel with her then boyfriend, now husband, around the world, as like most Australians like to do. And then we got into, and I'd moved out of India at that time. And so we got into this routine of like meeting each other in different places. And then after we did that a couple of times, it became this agreement that once I would go and meet her wherever she was, and the next time she would come and meet me. So we were in India, and she and her husband, were traveling back to Australia. They stopped in India and said, we were just in this place called Maine. And it was,
How exotic.
yes, it was gorgeous. We're going back there in 2 years. We've come and visited you this year. You come and visit us in Maine in 2 years from now. So we made a plan. And I have to say, like after I got my visa to come to the States on a tourist visa, 2 months before I came here, I met 3 Americans at a party in Bangalore who did not know where Maine was. And they, I'm not kidding, said, Maine, no, maybe you're going to Canada. And then I said, no, I'm going to Portland, Maine. And they're like, Portland? Oh, you mean Oregon? And so this is before the days of the internet. So I had to go back home that night. The party ended quite late. I went back home, pulled up an atlas map book, right? And flipped through pages trying to find Maine. And I really verified if the border was really on that side. Though I got the visa, I knew it was in the States, right? But at the same time, so it was a bit of like, wow, before I came here. But that's how. And so I ended up here. And the day before I left, we had a glorious summer here, camping on Keyser Falls. If you haven't been on Lake Stanley in Keyser Falls, if you haven't been there, it's a gorgeous area of Maine. And the day before I left, I was staying at an Airbnb here because Megan and Grant had left already, and I wanted to spend a few more days in Portland. And the day before I was leaving for India, I ran into someone who, struck up a conversation with me, and 45 minutes later was asking me to was offering me a job. And of course, I was on a tourist visa, and I couldn't just, work for anyone. And I had to go back to an art show that I was doing. And so, long story short, 2.5 months later, I was back in the States with the visa and working here.
And your first job here was director of the Multicultural Youth Program, is that right? So walk us through your jobs and your first experiences in Maine.
That was a really amazing experience because it couldn't have been a better place for someone who was immigrating from a land far away to be at the Center for Cultural Exchange, which brought world-class acts to Portland and the country, and people came there every week. And I was working with the schools and young children across all schools in the greater Portland, actually in the state of Maine, and making connections, right, with people who were doing really interesting stuff, people who were trying to run the, multicultural programs at schools, who were trying to do the GSA initiatives in schools. They were doing, working with the AG's office, doing the civil rights groups. There was just connections. They were overlapped. Everything was overlapping so well. And for someone arriving from far away with no one to connect with, not knowing anyone here, I had 3 friends here when I moved here. It was a great place to land.
Mm-hmm.
And to make those connections. A year and a half later after I moved here, I turned 30, and I threw myself a 30th birthday party at the Eastland. Okay, and I had 120 people there.
Nice.
And I was not accounting, but they were really people I really wanted there to share my 30th birthday with. Okay, so it's kind of, that gives you a sense of like what it was like to land here.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm also very extroverted, in case you guys didn't figure that out. And so being an extrovert, it was a great place to land, great place to make connections. So a year later, when I was leaving that job, there was another job someone offered to me. Then I moved to that job.
Yeah.
And I ended up working for the city of Portland.
And then you went on to work for the state as the Bureau Director of Multicultural Affairs for
Correct.
4 years.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
So we have to fast forward because we've got to get back to Maine, but let's spend some time talking about the Global Institute
Sure.
and what you did there and where you were and sort of the global experience that you have that you bring back to Maine, some of those learnings.
Okay. So the Global Institute is a nonprofit organization that works primarily with groups around the world to help them figure out how to become more relevant in their context, socially, politically, and to do that through inclusive practices and through collaborative leadership. I founded it, and we had operational hubs in Denmark, Copenhagen, where I was based. That's where the work actually started, and the States and India. And a lot of the work that we did through the Global Institute, which still exists, but it's mostly very active in India right now, not as much in Denmark and the States. We did projects around the world in Egypt, working with young activists. And again, those of you who may not be aware of this, there's been a big shift globally in terms of who is considered to be youth anymore. Like, there used to be a time where youth was someone who was 18 or 20. Now it's 30. Right, and for those of you, again, on the other side, wearing my other hat, if you're thinking that being wise and someone who others can look up to used to be around 65 at one point, now it's 50 and older, right? So keep that in mind. But the story there is like working with organizations like youth, 30 and under, helping them get involved in local municipal decision making. How do you engage, show up at these local panels and forums to let people know what your needs are as young people? And this is after the Arab Spring. Working in the Amazon with Amazonal tribes who are really trying to become more active in the political system, right? And traditionally they haven't had a voice because they are self-sufficient. They live in their own world and they're very happy, with their earth-friendly, self-sufficient practices and haven't really felt the need. But how do you really help them, give them the skills to show up, to leave with which is comfortable, an area, places that are comfortable to get someplace to work. Working in South India, working with a very large foundation, that's a Dutch foundation in Wageningen, and helping them bring solar stoves to India. But you don't just give people a solar stove, and expect them to, use them. How do you change the mindset of how every time you use a solar stove, you're actually helping the planet? How are you helping the climate goals? And how are you really making the world a better place, right? So those are very nuanced aspects. So you actually bring popular, people who are influential, housewives who don't have any other jobs, have never had an education, but are the matriarchs in that family or in that neighborhood. And you bring them together, engage them, because then that's the only way will all the other people, listen to you or
they're the
engage with you.
influencers.
So it's some of those stuff, those kinds of projects that I worked on.
So what are the learnings, I guess, that most resonate with you from the cross-cultural work? Like, what are the similarities between cultures?
Never assume you know how it can be done. Never assume what they need. And always walk in with being from a very humble place and from a place of inquiry, a sincere place of inquiry. And I think that's my biggest takeaway from all these years of doing international work, that even before, doing work here with multicultural communities across the state, with native tribes, with new immigrants, with refugees, it was always, that was a big takeaway for me.
And so now it's time to come back to Maine, and it was COVID really that got you back here. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So tell us how that all came to be.
So I was traveling in Asia as this kind of rumbling started, globally about things that were happening with this kind of virus that everyone's kind of worried about. We weren't sure. I was with a group of colleagues. I know on that trip, that particular trip, I was in Switzerland, I was in Denmark, I was in Egypt, Dubai, the UAE, and then I met up with a group of people in and Sri Lanka, and then met up with the people in India. And by which time things were getting pretty bad. And by the time I got to India, I did this 2-week trip with a couple of few people, and they left, and I went. I still have a home, in South India, so went there just to kind of, see family and spend a couple of days, and that was a mistake because I was stuck there. Fortunately, in my family home, and so that was not so bad. But I couldn't leave. I couldn't come back. All the commercial flights, all the repatriation flights were full, and there was so much unknown that there was no guarantee that you'd be spaced out or you paced out on the plane or any of that stuff. So it was really hard finding something. So I ended up spending an extra 4 months in India without knowing how to get back. And my partner and I kept booking flights. We booked 8 different tickets in that time, and because any flight, any airline that gave an indication that they might be flying, we had to have a ticket on there. It didn't happen, and so, but during the first 6 weeks of being there in India, everything shut down completely. I lost 80% of my work that was guaranteed for the next 3 to 4 years, where people were saying, we really don't know how this is going to play out. We really want to hold off. And some people were even asking us to kind of pay the money back to them because they were like, our board is saying that we really want to go back to the drawing board and reassess when this changes. Right? So it was not a very good place to be in, right?
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of like stuff going on in the head in terms of what next, what's going on, and also there was so much unknown with COVID itself. But anyway, long story short, came back on a private plane and costed a arm and a leg. But it was nice to be back home, land back here, Portland, Maine, and realize how fortunate we are to live in this gorgeous place where we could walk as much as we wanted, be outdoors. People were still kind, and there was just so much going on here in terms of quality of life. And being back here was something. So I had to reassess what I was doing. So I taught a Jan Plan course at Colby College, their winter semester on allyship for racial equity, and then just as that was coming to an end, my partner and I, had to talk and said, I think I'm gonna look for work here.
Yeah.
And within a week, I wasn't looking. Someone sent the job announcement from AARP saying, I think you'd be good for this. Why didn't you apply? They did not know I was looking. We just made the decision that I was going to start looking. And 7 interviews, 4 months later, I was in this role.
And that was like 2.5 years,
Yeah.
2 years ago? Yeah. So talk about your work at AARP.
I love working for AARP. Actually, someone just emailed me the other day who, I reconnected after a long time and said, from a distance, it looks like you're really loving your job at AARP. You seem to be doing a lot of outreach. AARP is more visible in Maine than it has ever been. But then you always seem to be liking everything that you do, which is so true. Which is so true. I've never had a bad job in my life. And yes, I've been very fortunate that way. I've had one very bad boss, but we'll not get there.
Okay.
But I've never had a bad job in my life. And so it was a great fit. AARP preaches what it practices, treats its employees really well, and just to kind of give you a glimpse of what kind of organization is, AARP expects every employee to take a full day off each quarter as a think day. To go and think about your work, be thoughtful about your work, and that's really saying something. That's just one example, right? So it has been a really good fit, primarily because AARP has an amazing mission, and most of the work that we do in the state, in every state for that matter, and including the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, it's 90% of it is done by volunteers.
Yeah, you said you have like 2,500-ish volunteers.
Yeah, we have like 2,400 volunteers across the state between age-friendly volunteers and advocacy volunteers, driver safety volunteers, tax aid volunteers. It's a phenomenal group from across the state, from Kittery, Maine to Fort Kent, and that's a really amazing network to work with. And they show up repeatedly to do the things that need to get done for other older adults.
Yeah, because many of the volunteers are older adults themselves, right?
Correct.
So, yeah.
Most of them are, yes.
Yeah. So we always talk about how Maine is the oldest state. So this is best state to run the AARP, right?
Yes, absolutely. And my the thing that I've been like, bringing up again and again, every forum I can get is, and I want to do it again here, is we should stop looking at Maine being the oldest state as a liability. We should shift the dialogue. We have an asset here. We are the oldest state in the country. It's amazing.
Agreed.
All that wisdom, all that experience, all of those networks, all of those connections. I think we really need to shift how we approach aging in our state. And we should be the leader, as Maine has been the leader on so many fronts. This really should be, an area where we need to shift the dialogue completely. Just as an example, a 93-year-old member called me a few months ago, and we got talking about something, and then at some point, she said, you were speaking at that event, and you told me to call you about anything at all, so I'm calling you about this. I'm 93 years old. I drive everywhere. I do everything by myself. I don't need any help. But what I really do need is I want to connect with people who are around my age. I said, that's very easy. We can put that together very easily. She's like, no, stop. I don't want to hang out with these 70-something-year-olds. They're too young. They have different priorities. I want to hang out with people who are 85 and above. She was so specific, right? And there's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
The attitude and the truth in what she said, right, is so important that we should not neglect that. We should really celebrate that. And we know what? We're going to start a group of people who are 85 and older. For them to come and socialize, maybe we'll start with once a month. And if they really want to take it, to another level, they may.
Well, count us in, because those are all our readers.
Awesome. Will do. Yeah.
So let's talk about shifting the narrative, the stigma of getting that mailer, right? So it shows up in your mailbox, and you're like, but we really should be like, yay! So how do you change that? How do you change that mindset?
That's a good question. It's a tough question too, because I think it's a cultural norm here. Mm-hmm. Where I grew up in India, the older you get, the more revered you are. People really look up to you. People really value what you have to say. And, older adults take, advantage of that, and that's not okay. Because they know they have this ultimate say, and then they're like, okay, I'm going to get as much out of this as possible. But there's something to be said about that approach, where you really recognize the wisdom that older people bring to the conversation. And here, the reason I threw myself that 30th birthday party is two of my really dear friends, one that I knew even before I moved to Maine, cried when she turned 30. She turned 30 3 months before I did. I was like, I'm not having any of that.
Yeah.
30, they'll be 40 and 50 and 60 and 70 and so on, right? So culturally in the States, there is this thing about you're getting older and that's not a good thing. And I think we need to really change that across the board, from schools, even schools, not, higher institutions of higher education, but, elementary school, middle school, just kind of shift the dialogue, how we kind of really approach that. But for when you do get to that age, when you turn 50 and you get the mailer in AARP, I'd say 9 out of 10 people cringe and they're like, ooh, too soon, right? But I think if people were to look at that and say, you know what? I'm getting to an age where I am really going to become part of the largest, most influential demographic in the country, that's a different way of looking at it. I will be spending the most to every dollar that's spent in this country. I think it's 46 cents to a dollar at this point. It's likely to get to 51 cents very soon. That's something to say I'm part of that group. Adults who are 50 and older are, they make up for over 60% of the voting demographic. And adults who are 60 and older are more than 80% likely to vote in an election. To realize and say, we're deciding how this country, operates, in which direction it goes, shifting that mindset, I think, is really important. And often people don't think about that.
You also mentioned, too, that when you're 50, not enough people are thinking about and planning for their future.
Yes. I mean, as you saw in the video here, we do a lot of work on Medicare. That's what most people know us for the work we do on Medicare, Social Security, prescription drug pricing. But we do a lot more than that. And in terms of helping people plan for their retirement and all of that. But the people who are really concerned about these issues are really people who shouldn't be as concerned. Well, actually, they should still be concerned, but not nearly as the people who are not concerned at all, who are in their 50s, who should start planning. You shouldn't start planning for your retirement when you get to 60. You should have had a plan in place for some time, right? So that's where I think it's really important, where people are not prepared to age and thrive as they please.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
People are not. They're not thinking about that. And so I think there's some room there for us to do something.
Yeah, for sure. So in the work that you're doing, what do you think the top issues are facing Maine's older adults, and how do you think about tackling them?
I think in Maine, there is as a rural state, the biggest problem I think is isolation and lack of access.
Mm-hmm.
If COVID was such a terrible thing for all of us, for everyone, even if it didn't impact you directly, if you didn't hurt badly, it still was bad indirectly, right, for all of us. But there's a couple of things that came out of COVID that was really, I think, very helpful, which is it made people stop and think of what's really valuable. And it also helped highlight some really serious problems in our community. How much we pay certain healthcare workers,
Mm-hmm.
how much we pay our teachers for all the great work that they do. But among that is also this sense of isolation and lack of access that most Maine, especially in a state like Maine, which is rural, people don't have access to opportunities the way they should. And we don't have good broadband in our state, right? So broadband could help fix problems like accessing telehealth, accessing economic opportunities, addressing isolation. But we don't have that. So I think for a lot of older adults, is that barrier where they don't feel connected to the things that they need to be connected, to feel like they're living a meaningful life, right? And I think that would be like the number one issue, I think. How are we addressing it? Broadband is a big issue. We're sharing, I was in a couple of different meetings. The state Maine Connectivity Authority is putting together, or has put together the state plan for digital equity, and the invited partners from across the state. I was there, and two people came up to me there and said, "What is AARP doing here?" I would have not expected AARP to show up at this conversation, right? And it was a great teaching moment,
Yeah.
right? To say, well, it's really important for AARP to be here. In fact, before the Connectivity Authority was here, AARP was giving away grants for digital equity. Small grants,
Yep.
18,000 here, 9,000 here, but grants would really help, achieve digital equity in our state. That's because older adults, like everyone else, need to have access to broadband, right? So that's one area. The other area is to really create meaningful opportunities that bring about local impact. If you don't know about AARP's Age-Friendly Network, it's a national initiative that's actually a WHO initiative that AARP runs nationally. We have 86 age-friendly communities across the state of Maine, the second highest in the country. And Massachusetts just took over from
Oh,
us.
we've got to get it back.
We have
Who
to
else
get
do
it
you
back.
need? We've got,
Yes, yes.
everyone can help.
Yes. So help us, please.
We've got to be number one.
But it's creating local impact in local communities by local leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And annually we do the community challenge grant. We give away about $3.4 million to help communities do small projects in their community. Whether if they want to start a transportation program, SACO got a grant in this year to start a transportation program, and or work with our other partners to kind of really support some of the work that they're doing in their local communities. Maine is really fortunate that we have people who want to work together, right? And I was just talking to Dan earlier, and I don't think he's here. Mainers want to work together, but there
Yes.
isn't a platform to kind of really support that collaborative effort, right? I'm going to call, Megan, who's sitting here, as a CEO for Southern Maine Area Agency on Aging. Last year, with the $800 tax credit that a lot of Mainers were getting, a lot of older adults couldn't get that because they were not doing their taxes because they make such little money, right? And they'd never done their taxes. So if you didn't do your taxes, you couldn't get those $800. And there was money there sitting somewhere with their name,
Yeah.
with their name against it, and they couldn't get it. So we had to work with partners like SMA to keep that program running for longer, so that we could do it. But it's those things, I think, looking at partnerships, creating local opportunities, meaningful local opportunities for older adults to feel like they're living someplace where they matter, I think is one, and then really helping them access, technology and other things that really make their lives more meaningful.
Yeah, it's really about bringing these opportunities. So that's such a good point. Like the $800 is sitting there and probably don't even know about it. So I have noticed how well you partner with organizations across the state, because I was at the small luncheon and you got the community engagement award. So yeah,
Thank you. Yes.
it's all coming together.
fun.
All right, let's shift gears for a second. So you've worked in the diversity, equity, and belonging space before we even had a name for it, right?
Correct.
So, I mean, decades of experience. So talk about what you think companies are doing right in that space, and then give us some tough love on how we can be better.
I think companies are having conversations now like never before, and I think another thing that happened during COVID, but partly because of George Floyd's murder, is I think for the first time, I think, again, going back to digital technology, things like that have been happening in our country for a long time. But George Floyd's murder, because of digital technology and the videos that we saw, and that kept coming up on our feeds again and again, made it so real to us, like for the first time, like it had never been before. Those things have been happening in our country for a very long time, right? Sadly, very sadly, for a long time. But when George Floyd's video went around, and a few other videos since then, I think people really said, this is really happening in my country, and that bad? And people started leaning in a lot more into wanting to learn what's really going on. Also, around the same time, people were recognizing there were newer language, there were newer words to kind of communicate with each other around the DEI, and belonging space, and kind of really wanting to do something about it. And if nothing else, at least wanting to become more aware. And I think that was a huge shift in the DEI and belonging space for the first time ever. I think in this country, we kind of went into a very different space. We went to a much higher level as a community, as a country, and I think so. What are companies doing well? I think companies are really taking it seriously, right? And they really want to kind of do something about it, and so that's a good thing. Tough love. don't do it in a way that seems very patronizing, right? I mean, don't do it. Don't show tokenism. Don't do things that will make it very obvious that you're doing it because you have to do it. Make it more meaningful. Make it more personal. Tailor it to what you're trying to do. One shoe does not fit all in this work at all, ever. So how do you really kind of really go back to the drawing board and say, what can we do as an organization, as an enterprise, as a business, to really shift the dialogue? And for those of us who in the room, or in general in the society, who think that businesses don't really have much of a role to play, I will correct them. Businesses are an equal partner in this work, and they just have as much responsibility as the not-for-profit sector and the public sector, and to kind of really shift this dialogue. So when businesses come to the table and really bring innovative practices that are truly meaningful, sincere, and inclusive, and that are tailor-made, I think it would really make a big difference. And that would look different for the Rue Institute, that would look different for the Press Herald, that would look different for AARP. It needs to look different because the approach needs to be tailored at the end of the day.
That's good. Thank you. I feel like a lot of people were very earnest about getting started and then have stalled a little bit. So it's hard to keep, or it's essential to keep the momentum going. And I have to remind myself of that at our company too. Talk about your experience coming to Maine as an immigrant and working as a leader.
I cannot imagine living anywhere else other than Maine in the States.
Same.
Yes, absolutely. I simply cannot. I love, 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 love living here. And if that wasn't clear enough. The thing is, though, I think I gave you this example the other day, and I'll repeat that again. Within a year of moving here, because I moved late 2000, and then 9/11 happened the following year, in September. So it wasn't even a whole year since I moved here. Between 9/11 and Thanksgiving that year, I received 212 voicemails on my answering machine. From most of them, there were probably, I don't know, a handful, 30, 40 people that, I knew personally. But the rest of them were all from people I had no clue who they were. And this is, landline days, yellow book telephone, yellow book days, right?
Yellow pages.
Yes, yellow pages. And people finding my name in the phone book, picking up the phone, making an effort, calling me and saying, Noel, you don't know me, or you don't know my family, but we know of you. Or some cases, we don't know much about you either. Hopefully that'll change someday. But we just want you to know that we are so happy you are part of our community. We are happy you're here. We don't know what kind of experiences you're having since 9/11 as a person of color, but we want you to know that you're welcome here, that you are one of us. And that was within my first year, it really spoke to what Maine is all about. And Mainers usually are not very, extroverted. Mainers don't go out and strike up a conversation with people, right? And so it truly is. It set the tone for how I built my relationship with the state of Maine and the people of Maine. And so it was, as an immigrant, it made a big difference. It was great that I landed at the Center for Cultural Exchange. It was a perfect place for me to start. And then I built very quickly, I built a meaningful community here, not because I built it myself, it's because the others in that community too were very thoughtful about building a community here. And so it was very easy for me, at least, to kind of really build that and to call Maine home very quickly. I don't care what anyone says. I'm from away, but I'm a Mainer. I don't have 7 generations of history here. Oh, but boy, I'm such a Mainer, right?
Yeah.
And so it's that ownership as well, I think, that makes a big difference.
I can't even imagine how many people will be at your next birthday party. Right?
I just turned 50 not too long ago, and I had several birthday parties all through the year.
Oh, that's the way to keep the party going. All right, let's switch to some of the questions we got in advance, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Doug Packard, who's here, wants to know, how do you keep evolving your leadership skills?
That I think is the $1 million question for me, because if you don't keep evolving, you are not just in your leadership style, but as a human being. If you do not appreciate lifelong learning, you know, then you're just not significant in any way. And I'm actually making a very bold statement by saying that, because I think we have to keep evolving all the time. The world's changing, the circumstances are changing, the awareness of how people live, our neighbors live, we're finding new language to communicate with each other. And I think taking that into like the context of, leadership, um, I think it's really important to pay attention to what's really going on around you, to listen with intent all the time, because if you're not, you're really not evolving as a human being. And for leadership in particular, if you want people to look up to you, you do it in a way that works for the people you want to influence. All right, I mean, you don't change who you are at your core. You're either a collaborative leader or not. You're an authoritarian or not. You're a decide and tell or kind of boss or not, right? But at the end of the day, if you're not really adapting your leadership style, don't change it 100%. But if you're not adapting it to the people you're working with, you're losing a significant opportunity, and that's where you keep evolving. Yeah.
Yeah, good question. Good question, Doug. I'm always working. I'm a horrible interrupter. But I think about it while I'm doing it, so at least I'm aware of it. I think that's a start.
It's a very good start.
Yeah. Lisa DeFranza is asking, how is AARP connected with the creative community in Maine? And I just learned you have a beautiful Instagram account. Shame on me for not making that part of my research.
Well, the arts, I think, are very important across the board for anyone, for life. That's also coming from someone who's an artist. But AARP, if you go on, if you're not an AARP member, if you don't ever want to be an AARP member, that's okay. But we have hundreds and thousands of resources on our website for anyone, and those are some of the most amazing resources you could ever find. You're working on housing legislation, we have resources. You're working on broadband advocacy, we have resources. But you want to do yoga, you want to do meditation, you want to join an art class, you want to do a wine and sip and paint class, we have all of those resources at AARP. And art happens to be a really big part of what we offer for our members when we talk about local engagement, local impact, because folks really want to be, inspired creatively. So it always has been part of what we do. So you just have to go onto our website. And then there's also something called the AARP Minute. If you don't know what the AARP Minute is, it's exactly 30 seconds, of really inspiring, important bits of information that will make your life better, period. Right? Yeah.
Is it a video or?
It's a video.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's called the AARP Minute.
I think I could invest a minute a day, a minute a day.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to do that. Okay. Ann Heroes from the Center for Grieving Children asked the question, the future for Maine and growing intercultural communities, is it bright?
It's very, very bright. Okay, because I think we are becoming more of a thoughtful community in the state of Maine. We are also recognizing our neighbors, our brothers and sisters whose land we are on right now, and also recognizing how to kind of really make this a better place for those folks who are arriving every day, and are arriving in the most alien place they could ever imagine. Coming from warm places to cold, bitter Maine, to such a big shift. And I think we as a community are very welcoming. There's a reason why in the early 2000s, we had so many immigrants, refugees, coming from other places in the States to Maine because Maine was a better place. And are we doing it well? Are we doing it perfectly? No, we're not. But let's not make the good be the enemy of the perfect, because we can work towards that. But it is bright because I think we are a very collaborative state. And I think I mean, you've heard this before too. Like, this is a state where you don't want to burn your bridges. I mentioned this before. Everybody knows everyone. And if you really want to stay here, work here, live here for a while, don't burn bridges. Because very soon, everybody you haven't met would know why they should work with you. So, it's one of those communities where things can happen because people are connected with each other.
Yeah.
And as long as you know how to use it and leverage it and embrace it and appreciate it, things can happen. And I think there's so much promise for an immigrant, for a new American coming here, and to kind of really make Maine home. And it's a small increase, but I think we've become more diverse in the last 10 years than we have forever.
Yeah.
And I think that's a sign.
Yeah. Your optimism is infectious. So thank you. Thank you. What questions do our guests have?
I'm Louise Haggett. I'd like to know about your involvement with the United Nations and the NGOs.
Okay.
How you get involved in that?
Sure. I was the board chair for the Association for World Education, which is an international organization based out of Denmark, and with members from 28 countries around the world. And I was representing that organization, that network at the UN as the main rep I still am actually, it's been 13 years now, 14 years now. And 3 years ago, someone nominated my name for the UN NGO Executive Council, which is affiliated to the United Nations NGO unit. And there was an election, and I made no effort at all, and I won the election, and I was elected to that body, but it has been a really rewarding experience to be recognized for all the international work that I had done up until that point, that someone nominated me, and that enough people felt like I could make a difference, that they voted for me. And it's been a really amazing experience to be on the Global NGO Executive Committee. That's the name of the official body there. And we are working on bringing the needs of NGOs around the world to the UN, to represent their needs and to make sure that NGOs around the world and are able to have a voice at the table, right? And we also had a terrible mishap about a year or so ago, where our chair of the board on Zoom while we're in a meeting, had a heart attack.
Oh.
And so the organization, the board has been in transition since then, and we're really trying to change our bylaws to make this a more inclusive board. We just selected our 2 new co-presidents, which we never had done before, to represent the network. But the work at the end of the day on the ground is really highlighting the needs of NGOs around the world. And for those, if you're familiar with the NGO world, the UN hosted the NGO conference every couple of years in different parts of the world for a long time. We were the body that really made that happen. And that is primary, and bringing about 7,000 people from around the world. And that is a huge part of what we do, is really building the connection and strengthening the connection between the NGO world and the United Nations. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah, but that's a little background there. Yeah.
Good question. We have time for one more. Marty?
I'm just wondering, based off of that, do you have any political aspirations?
No, I did not, because
We would vote for you, right?
Thank
We
you.
would.
Thank you very much. I was told in no uncertain terms 4 years ago by my partner that if I ever run for office, we would not have a relationship anymore. Okay, so I take that very seriously. Yes, yes. No, I do not. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I had a couple more questions. We didn't get to them, but I think we had a wonderful conversation. We're so thankful that you call Maine home, and we are happy to have you here making connections. And I'm going to become an AARP member. It's time.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and enjoy this beautiful day in Maine.
Thank you.